Good evening, campers. Before we get into the review, let's talk about the circumstance to how this book ended up in my hands. Grace over at GK Reads asked me if she could send me a bundle of books, of which this was one of them.
Fun clip in here for Kieran if you're watching, or for anyone else if they'd like to play along, to give some little clues about the 3 books that I have sent to Kieran. But here's a little game for you. So this is a Booker Prize winning book.
What have we got now? Okay, this is the one that Grace said she was going to send me, because I equally have not got a copy of this. Julian Barnes' Sense of Ending, which I believe is still like the shortest Man Booker winner. Grace loves it, and I trust Grace. I mean, don't do like a day in the life of reading Julian Barnes. I won't, because I'm a really slow reader. And so on that day, I began reading this book. We got off to quite a tumultuous start. The one that I first started is here. Okay. Julian Barnes, Sense of Ending. I know Grace likes a slow burn, but it took me, this is a short novel, what, 150 pages? It took me 3 days to get to part 2, which is page 59, and I've just parked it aside. I'm just not enjoying this at all. I will finish part 2. I just don't know when. A fortnight on and this is still kept in the shadows, but due to a clear out that we do annually, I came across that I already owned a copy and I wasn't aware of it. Now at the end of this review, I'm going to give you details of how you can enter an international giveaway, and this unread copy will be sent to that lucky person. Julian Barnes I wouldn't class as a prolific author, though he has had a long writing career, but in regards to what his most popular books are, I would probably say the Vox Populi would go for Flaubert Parrot and this, The Sense of Ending, which won the Man Booker in 2011. Most definitely because there's a film with Jim Broadbent, also known as Bridget Jones's dad, who stars as our main protagonist, Tony Webster, who I wouldn't say is an unreliable narrator. Unreliable narrator does get bandied around quite a lot in regards to a protagonist who isn't telling things as they are. Tony Webster, to me, isn't unreliable. He's just not omnipresent. Let's rewind and unpick what I've just said. This book is split into 2 different sections. The first one is Tony narrating from his childhood, his days in school, his experience with a youth suicide, his early relationship, a short relationship with Veronica, who this story will really ravel around. The young couple's split allows Tony's friend Adrian to be in a relationship with Veronica, and Tony, with best interests at heart, writes a letter to Adrian saying that she has been damaged in some way, shape or form by their own relationship. It's vague, nothing is specified, but Tony believes that will give Adrian enough of a heads up of what relationship he's getting into. Months go by and Adrian commits suicide. It's the second instance of death that Tony has experienced within his youth. The funeral is closed off to anyone who is not close family. Not months, not years, rather decades goes by. In part 2, Tony is 60 years older. This is where the story starts, in my opinion. Veronica's mother has passed away, and in her will she has sent Tony £500 and 2 documents. Understandably bemused, because why would the mother of his girlfriend from 40 years ago, with whom he's had 0 contact with, he's been married to Margaret, who's now divorced, he's had kids, he's had an entire life, separated them. Why now, out of the blue, has he received something from her? He's not forced to be reacquainted, he's not seeking her out. It's more so curiosity that kills the cat. He wants to understand why Veronica's mum has included him in the will. With all that set up, and yes, I have missed some details so you can actually enjoy this. You have about 60 pages left until you finish this novella, reaching 150 pages. The latter half of this novel goes like wildfire as Tony is placing himself back in his youth in these relationships to understand how his own actions has affected the life of someone else of which he was unaware of because he was not within that storyline. 40 years ago, he was part of the story, he was part of the timeline, but during their split as a couple, they completely verge off. Tony has no impact on Veronica, and Veronica has no impact on Tony until this moment. This will forces them to come back together. This is why I don't think Tony's an unreliable narrator, because he wasn't there. He wasn't part of that storyline. The only thing that connects him is that he's on the same timeline. He was around at the time. Yes, what he said or what he did has consequences that ultimately disrupt the narrative of this, but his memory fails to serve him correctly because he's never had to remember it. That's why I feel unreliable narrator isn't fair to put on Tony, because he's not unreliable. He just has never had to think about those circumstances at all. It's reminiscent of life. We all say and do things that have consequences here and there in every interaction that we do. But in 40 years' time, if you were asked to recall one precise moment of everything that happened, you're not unreliable. You're just human to not remember everything that has happened. Significant pillars can always be erected on one's life, such as first love, such as the first instance of death, such as the death of a close one. We can all pinpoint those out, but how everything would connect to each other, we would all be wrong. We're fallible, and being fallible does not equate to being unreliable or untrustworthy. We're human, we err. And with that said, was it wrong of me to have put this down in the first place? Should I have, on the first attempt, just finished it? Just finished this 150-page book? Well, from reading it from the beginning again, part one, despite that giving you the backstory, is boring. Oh, it's so boring. School days of Tony Webster are akin to a dry, boring history class. Apart from two key moments that crop up in the second section, I think the first part could be dropped completely, because part two onwards really is the story. Now, this kind of leads on to the other thing. What I knew about this book is that everyone said it's like a puzzle, and that you're trying to piece everything together in order to understand the ending. And there's a lot of theories on the ending, on what it all means and what actually happens. When I sat down and finished it, maybe I'm not smart enough for this book, I don't know, but I thought, well, it's only one real occurrence that has happened here, and it's one out of two people. I didn't really understand how there's multiple theories going on. I didn't really understand what puzzle I was meant to piece together, because I feel as though Julian Barnes gives you enough of a in it with his math equation. I didn't really understand what else there could be, so I did a bit of trawling on the internet, because I was like, what am I missing here? Why is everyone saying this is like such a clever book and you have to like read each page individually? Because I thought, what am I missing? And I came across this. Barnes got the title of this book from Frank Commode's criticism called The Sense of an Ending, Studies in the Theory of Fiction. And I think it's really worth noting that this book is also 150 pages long. The main argument of this book is that poets are not expected to give us an understanding of our own lives in conjunction with theirs, but there has to be some dialogue. Rather than us sitting outside of a timeline, we should be involved in the same timeline. Ergo, though there's dissonance and space that separates us, we should implement ourselves within the story. And that's what Tony is. He's separated from Veronica's timeline, but Julian Barnes forcibly puts him back into that story. He has to be within the same timeline. Commode, the person who wrote this book, even goes as far to say that we shouldn't even classify books as myths. If we take the Iliad and the Odyssey, because they're classified as myths, we are completely distanced away from that story and don't seem to take in how that affects our lives, how everything is part of the continuum. Due to everything being continual, due to time being linear, the fact that everything follows on from another, there's never an end. There's just a sense of an ending. And going back to Barnes's novel, you do get a sense of an ending. Even though Adrian has killed himself, he still is able to feed into Tony's life 40 years on. Even though the relationship had ended, Tony is still attached to Veronica in a way. Even though his marriage has ended, Tony and his ex-wife Margaret still talk. They are still close to each other. And even at the end of this, the fact that it's open-ended, the fact that there's interpretation that you could put into it, the story doesn't end. We continue that story on. Barnes is clearly in conversation with the theory, and that's all fine and dandy, but is this an enjoyable book? It's okay. The first half I found a slog. The end, I think, if you go in and expecting this to be like a puzzle, in fact you have to like really analyse everything, I think the end's going to give you a bit of a, oh, okay, not all the information is spoon-fed, but it is there on a platter for you to peruse. It's okay, it's a 5 out of 10, it's a book that you can read in one day, and you'll probably enjoy yourself. But let's talk about the giveaway. Down below, please put the bread emoji, and in 2 days' time over on my Instagram, I will announce who this will go to. So please make sure to follow me over on Instagram so that I can notify you. I'll also send 2 other books with it as well. So there will be 3 books in total. And again, I'll ship it anywhere in the world. Because of the title of this book, I wanted to do something quirky because to give you like a sense of an ending, but I can't think of anything. So I'm just going to end it now.